Zodiac Alchemy. 12 Tales of Cosmic Connection. Leo. Tale 5. The Gilded Stage. A Hood Eloquence original. Where the streets meet the literature. Leo season fire sign the Radiant King. Part 1. The Architecture of Longing. In which a curtain rises and a woman discovers the cost of genius. The most courageous act is still to think for yourself. Aloud. Coco Chanel. Chapter 1. Opening night. The theaters smelled like old ambition. That was how Nia Davis always described it to herself on the rare occasions she could stand still long enough to breathe. The specific musk of velvet curtains that had absorbed decades of applause and sweat and heartbreak, of grease paint and rosin dust, of expensive perfume from patrons who wore their wealth the way lesser people wore clothing, loudly, deliberately, as armor. The Moreau Grand on 47th Street had been built in 1924, and every brick in its facade remembered what it had witnessed. It was the kind of building that made you feel small in a way that was also, somehow, magnificent. Nia stood in the wings, specifically, the stage-left wing, pressed against a flat, painted to look like the facade of a Harlem brownstone, and listened to the audience settle into their seats. She could not see them, but she could feel them. The collective weight of 3,000 people shifting, coughing, silencing their phones. The rustle of playbills. The particular anticipatory silence that descends on a theater in the last 30 seconds before a house goes dark, when the air itself seems to understand that something irreversible is about to begin. She had written every word of what they were about to see. She had written it in a studio apartment in Crown Heights over the course of 4 years, scribbling scenes on legal pads during her lunch breaks, typing rewrites at 2 a.m. with her knees pulled to her chest and her laptop balanced on a pillow. She had written it around 2 relationships that hadn't survived her dedication to the work, around a day job she'd only recently managed to quit, around a grief so enormous and so private she'd had no choice but to give it to her characters because she couldn't figure out what else to do with it. She had written it blood deep and bone close, the way some people pray, which is to say without any real certainty that anything was listening, but unable to stop. And now it was going to be performed by a cast of 11 at the most celebrated theater in New York City, directed by a woman who had won 2 Tonys before the age of 40, with costumes that cost more per piece than Nia's monthly rent had been for most of her adult life. She should have been proud. She was terrified. "You're going to hyperventilate." The voice came from behind her, low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had been trained to carry without effort. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. There was only one person in this building whose voice had that particular quality, the quality of a man who had learned, somewhere in his formation, that the world would lean toward him if he simply spoke. "I'm not hyperventilating," she said. "Your shoulders are up around your ears. That's just how I stand." "Nia." A pause, and she could hear the amusement in it. "You've been standing here since the half-hour call. Paula told me." She finally turned. Dante Williams was not, strictly speaking, what people meant when they said a man was beautiful. He was too much of something for beautiful, too present, too vivid, the kind of face that cameras loved because it didn't simplify in 2 dimensions the way most faces did but instead seemed to acquire additional depth, additional geometry. He was 41 years old and looked it, which was rare in this industry. The fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the particular set of his jaw, these were not things he had tried to hide or minimize. He wore them the way he wore everything, with an ease so complete it ceased to be ease and became simply the truth of who he was. He was also, at this moment, standing 6 inches from her in the cramped architecture of the stage-left wing, wearing his Act 2 costume, a beautifully cut charcoal suit with a deep gold pocket square, and looking at her with the expression she had come to privately think of as his seeing expression. Not performance. Not charm. Just looking. "I'm fine," she said. It came out smaller than she intended. "The show is going to be extraordinary. You don't know that." "I've been doing this for 20 years, he said. "I know." They had met 8 months ago, when his production company had acquired the rights to her play. She had expected, going into that first meeting, to encounter the version of Dante Williams she knew from magazines and from the 14 films she had seen him in over the past decade, the effortless charisma, the professional warmth, the carefully maintained distance that celebrities deployed to protect themselves from the weight of other people's projections. She had not expected him to read her script. Not really read it. Not the way he clearly had, with notes in the margins and questions about character motivation that were so precise and so perceptive that she'd had to sit with them overnight before she could answer. This scene in Act 2, he'd said at that first meeting, tapping a page she recognized as the confrontation between her lead character and her mother. "You've written it so that the audience can't be sure which of them is right. That's intentional, isn't it? You want them uncomfortable." "Yes," she'd said, surprised. "Good." He'd looked at her then, and she had felt, for the first and disorienting time, the full force of his attention. "That's the bravest thing in the script. Don't let anyone talk you out of it." She had not let anyone talk her out of it. She had thought about him saying it more times than she was comfortable admitting. "The house is full," he said now, nodding toward the stage. "Standing room. There were people out front without tickets when I drove up." "Please don't tell me that." "Why not?" "Because now I'm imagining all of their faces when my second act doesn't land the way I need it to." "The second act is going to land," he said, with a certainty so unqualified it bordered on arrogance, except that it didn't quite cross the line, because it was undergirded by something that felt less like ego and more like faith. "I promise you that." She looked at him for a long moment. In the dim backstage light, the gold of his pocket square caught the ghost light from the stage and threw a faint warmth across the planes of his face. "You shouldn't make promises you can't keep," she said. He smiled. It was a slow smile, the kind that started in his eyes before it reached his mouth, and it did something complicated to the architecture of her chest. "I never do," he said. The show landed. She knew it from the audience's silence during the confrontation scene. Not the restless silence of people waiting for something to happen, but the held-breath silence of people who have forgotten to breathe because they are too present in the moment to remember their own bodies. She knew it from the laughter in the first act, generous and unguarded. She knew it from the sound, at the curtain call, of 3,000 people on their feet. She did not go out for the curtain call. She never did. She was a playwright, not a performer, and the thought of standing under those lights while people looked at her, really looked at her, was a specific kind of horror she had never been able to reason herself out of. It wasn't false modesty. It was closer to the thing she felt when she looked at her own reflection for too long, an unsettling sense of seeing something she hadn't given anyone permission to see. She watched from the wings instead, the way she always watched, from the periphery, in shadow, grateful for the darkness that let her observe without being observed. Dante took his bow last. The audience volume changed when he walked out, not louder, exactly, but different in quality, fuller, the way a room sounds when someone has turned on all the lights. He walked to center stage with his hands clasped in front of him, acknowledging the cast, acknowledging the house, and then he turned and looked directly into the stage left wing. He looked directly at her. She was in shadow. He couldn't possibly see her. But he held his gaze there for a long, deliberate moment before he bowed, as if he knew exactly where she was standing and wanted her to know that he knew. Chapter 2. The script that was not hers. The review in the Times dropped at 11:15 p.m. Nia was in the green room, still processing the reality of what had just happened, the standing ovation, the wine being pressed into her hand by people she'd never met, the particular surreal quality of success when it arrives before you fully rehearsed receiving it, when her phone began to vibrate. Then again. Then 3 times in quick succession. She excused herself from a conversation she hadn't been fully present in anyway and stepped into the corridor. The first text was from her friend Jackie Brown, who worked in theater journalism and had been at the performance. 5 stars. He called it the most fully realized debut from a black playwright since Susan Laurie Parks. "You need to see this." The second text was from her mother, which was simply a string of crying laughing emojis and the words "That's my baby" in all capitals. The third text was from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. It was a link. The preview text read, "Rising Star, how Maverick Theater's bold new work is redefining the Black American stage." She frowned. Maverick Theater was a downtown company, experimental, well-funded, with a reputation for aggressive production choices. She'd seen their work twice and respected it. What did they have to do with anything? She clicked the link. She read the article 3 times before she fully understood what she was reading. Maverick Theater had announced, 2 weeks ago, she would later confirm, at which point the press had been too consumed by other things to notice, the opening of a production called The Crossing House. The article described it in terms so familiar they made the green room corridor tilt under her feet, a multi-generational story about a black family navigating grief, property, and identity in a rapidly gentrifying Harlem. A daughter estranged from her mother by competing visions of what it means to survive. A house that becomes a character. A second act structured around a confrontation that deliberately resists resolution. The article quoted the credited playwright, a man named Dean Harrison, described as an emerging voice in American theater, explaining his process. She recognized her process. She recognized her structure. Her thematic architecture. The specific emotional logic of her second act. Sentence after sentence, she recognized herself. She did not cry. She went cold instead, the way she went cold when something was so wrong it exceeded the emotional register that tears could address. Her hands were very still on her phone. The noise of the party in the green room came to her from a great distance, like sound traveling through water. She thought about 4 years. She thought about the legal pad she'd filled in a Crown Heights apartment. She thought about the morning she'd sent her script to the 3 development organizations she'd trusted with early drafts, one of which, she now remembered with a cold and specific clarity, had a board member with close ties to Maverick Theater. She thought about how thoroughly and how cheerfully she had been robbed. She found Dante backstage. He was out of his costume, in his own clothes, dark jeans, a black linen shirt, the sleeves rolled, and surrounded by the specific atmosphere of warmth and deference that followed him everywhere in professional spaces. He saw her face before she said anything. He ended the conversation he was in mid-sentence. What happened? She handed him her phone. He read it. She watched his face while he read it, and what she saw was not the flicker of calculation or performance management she might have expected from someone for whom public relations was a professional survival skill. What she saw was something simpler and more elemental, a man arriving at the full understanding of what had been done to someone he cared about. His jaw tightened. When did this go up? The Maverick announcement? 2 weeks ago. And nobody caught it. Nobody was looking. He handed the phone back to her. He was very still in the way that large, powerful things are sometimes still, not passivity, but containment. The stillness of something that has not yet decided to move. We'll fix this, he said. How? Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. By the time our lawyers file anything, their show will have run for a month. The narrative will be set. I'll be the woman making trouble for Nia. He said her name the way he said everything, with a completeness that made the word feel finished. I said we'll fix it. I meant we. She looked at him for a long moment in the backstage corridor, the distant sounds of celebration pressing in from the green room, the ghost light of the empty stage visible through the open door at the end of the hall. What are you going to do? Something they won't be expecting, he said. Because people like them never expect the light. Chapter 3. The Weight of a Name. She did not sleep that night. This was not unusual for her after a significant professional event. Her brain had always processed major experiences through a kind of slow, iterative insomnia, returning to the same images and sentences the way a tongue returns to a sore tooth. But this was different from post-opening night adrenaline. This was the particular sleeplessness of someone who has been wronged and cannot yet act on it, who must hold the weight of the injustice in her body while the mechanisms of response are still assembling themselves. She sat at the small desk in her hotel room. The production company had put her up at a boutique place on 44th, clean lines and expensive quiet, with her laptop open to the Maverick Theater Productions press materials, reading with the careful, methodical attention she usually reserved for her own rewrites. She was building a case in her head. She did this the way she did most things, systematically, without illusion, accounting for every weakness in her own argument before she advanced it. The structural parallels were undeniable. Anyone who had read both scripts would see them. The question was whether anyone who mattered would take the time to read both scripts, or whether the story would be absorbed into the ambient noise of industry rumor, another black woman claiming credit, another established organization defending its choices, another dispute that resolved in favor of the party with better PR. She knew how these stories went. She had watched them go that way her entire career. At 2 a.m, her phone lit up with a text from Dante. Are you still awake? It was not phrased as a question. Yes, she typed back. A long pause. Then, come downstairs. Bring something warm. He was in the hotel bar, which was closed, but apparently accessible to people with Dante Williams's particular relationship to institutional doors. The lights were low, the chairs up on the tables except for 2, and he was sitting in one of them with a glass of something amber and a legal pad covered in handwriting. He looked up when she came in. You've been working, she said. I've been thinking out loud. He nodded at the other chair. Sit. She sat. She was wearing the oversized sweatshirt she'd packed for sleeping, and her hair was out, natural, coiled dense and free around her face. She had not, in the privacy of her own exhaustion, dressed for an encounter with anyone. She watched him notice this and then, with a deliberateness she found oddly moving, not make it a thing. I called David Lee, he said. David Lee was the most prominent entertainment attorney in the country, known specifically for intellectual property work in theater and film. He'll have a preliminary assessment to us by morning. Dante. It's 2 a.m. He owes me a favor. A slight smile. Several, actually. But more importantly, he read your script during development. He was on the reading committee when you submitted to the Harlem Stage Fund. She stared. He was. He remembers it. He remembers you. He said. Dante glanced at his legal pad, and I'm quoting directly. That script had fingerprints all over it that nobody else could have left. His words. Something tightened in her throat. She pressed it back. That's helpful. But a legal case takes. I'm not going to win this in court, he said. Not primarily. Court is too slow and too private. What I'm going to do is win it in public, before they have time to construct a counter-narrative. He turned the legal pad toward her. I have a red carpet event tomorrow night. The Drama League Benefit Gala. Every major theater journalist in the city will be there, plus the Times, the Post, and 3 television cameras. I'm going to give a speech. She looked at the legal pad. What was written there was not notes. It was a draft. You wrote a speech tonight, she said. A beginning, he said. I wanted your input before I finished it. It's your story. I'm not going to tell it without you. She looked at him for a long time. The amber light of the bar was very gentle, and he looked in it the way he always looked, present, unguarded, with that quality of attention she had been trying and failing to put a name to for 8 months. It wasn't interest. Interest was too common. It was closer to recognition. The specific quality of a person who sees you and is not frightened by what they see. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because someone has to." That's not an answer. He set down his glass. He looked at her the way he had looked at her from the stage during the curtain call, direct, deliberate, making sure she understood she was being seen. "Because you wrote something true," he said. "And true things deserve to exist in the light." And because a pause, briefer than it seemed, waited with something he was deciding whether to say. "Because I've been watching you for 8 months, give everything you have to this work and ask nothing for yourself, and I'm tired of watching you disappear into the wings when you deserve to be center stage." The quiet of the closed bar held the words. Nia looked down at the legal pad. At the handwriting she was beginning to recognize as his precise and slightly angular, with the occasional crossed-out word that suggested genuine thought rather than performance. "Show me what you have," she said. Part 2. The Private Geography of Heat. In which the theater becomes a world unto itself, and proximity becomes dangerous. The flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. But what a burning. Adapted from Lao Tzu. Chapter 4. What the Spotlight Does. They worked until 4 in the morning. This was, she would later reflect, the thing she had not anticipated about Dante Williams, not the public grace, which she'd known about and braced for, but the private rigor. The way he worked a sentence the same way she did, testing its weight, checking where it wanted to fall, discarding anything that performed at the expense of meaning. He had opinions. Strong ones. He voiced them without apology and without ego, and when she disagreed with him he listened in a way that was neither defensive nor capitulatory, but simply listening. They disagreed about the 3rd paragraph. "It's too much," she said. "You're over-explaining the theft. The audience will understand the implication without the full parallel structure. The audience at a Drama League gala," he said, "is not a theater audience. They haven't read the script. They need the specificity. The specificity makes it sound like a legal brief. The specificity makes it sound like proof." He tapped the legal pad. "There's a difference. You write for people who lean in. I need to write for people who are also holding a glass of wine and thinking about the next thing they're going to say." She considered this. He was right. She didn't want to tell him he was right because she was tired and frustrated, and the conversation had shifted slightly, in the past hour, into a register of intimacy that she was trying not to name. "Fine," she said. "But cut the last sentence of that paragraph. It's where the brief feeling lives." He looked at it. He crossed it out. "Better," he said. "Yes." They looked at each other across the table, the legal pad between them, the bar quiet and warm around them. "You're very difficult," he said. "I'm a playwright," she said. "We're all difficult. It's in the union contract." He laughed, a real laugh, not the public one, quieter and less curated. She had heard it only a handful of times. Each time, it did something specific to her equilibrium that she had been carefully declining to examine. They walked up to their respective floors at 4:15. The hotel corridor was the deep, carpeted quiet of a place where everyone else was asleep, the overhead lights dimmed to something gentler and more amber. Her door was on the 6th floor. His was on the 8th. At the elevator, he stopped. "Nia. Don't." She said it quietly, not harshly. "Not tonight. I can't. I have too many things to process, and you are one of the things I'm trying not to process, and I need to sleep." A long pause. "Okay," he said. She stepped into the elevator. The doors began to close. In the last sliver of his face visible through the narrowing gap, she saw him, patient, warm, unhurried. Watching her the way he always watched her. Like she was worth watching. Like he had all the time in the world. The gala was at the plaza. She had attended it once before, years ago, as a guest of a director friend, and had spent the whole evening feeling slightly outside of her own body. The way she always felt in spaces that had been built for a version of theater that was older and more exclusive than the version she had grown up loving. The Drama League had been doing meaningful work for decades, but its galas still had the quality of events at which certain kinds of people expected to see certain kinds of other people, and Nia was still, at 34, working on her relationship with rooms where she was not who those people expected. Tonight she was not a guest. Tonight she was sitting at Dante's table. This distinction, she was learning, was not small. The table seated 10. She was placed at his right hand, which she later learned was intentional. He had arranged the seating. To his left was his producing partner, a meticulous woman named Stephanie Ford, who ran their production company with the organized ferocity of a person who had decided very early that chaos was a luxury she couldn't afford. Across the table were the lead producer of their show, a set designer whose work Nia had admired for years, and 3 other people whose names and affiliations she was too nervous to fully retain. "You look extraordinary," Dante said, when she sat down. She had dressed carefully. She had debated for an hour between the navy dress she'd brought and the gold one she'd bought in a panic at a boutique on Fifth Avenue that afternoon, guided by Jackie, who had said simply, "The gold. It's armor. Put on your armor." The gold dress was structured at the shoulder and fell to the floor, and it caught the light the way gold things do, warmly, completely, without apology. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," she said. "You don't have to be ready," he said. "You just have to be here." He picked up his water glass. Under the table, briefly, his other hand found hers and pressed once, the kind of touch that is a whole sentence without being a gesture. Then he released it. She breathed. Chapter 5. The Dance. The speeches happened between the second and third courses. She knew the gala's format, had reviewed it with Stephanie that afternoon. There were 3 scheduled remarks: the league president, a major donor, and the evening's honoree, who this year was a director named William Branch, 73 years old and 40 years into a career that had shaped American theater in ways most people who benefited from it couldn't fully articulate. None of these were Dante. He had not been scheduled to speak. Which meant, she understood, watching him excuse himself quietly from the table between the donor's remarks and William Branch's introduction, that what he was about to do was unplanned. Which meant the room was not prepared for it. Which meant he was about to walk into the gap between expectation and reality and fill it with his own considerable force. She watched him cross to the edge of the dais. She watched him speak briefly with the league president, a woman named Paula Harrison who ran the organization with the kind of calm authority that implied she had seen everything, and she watched Paula Harrison's eyebrows rise, and then watched her nod. And then Dante Williams walked to the microphone. The room quieted the way rooms quiet for him, not all at once but in a wave, the way a crowd parts for someone moving through it with genuine purpose. He stood at the podium without notes, his hands resting loosely on either side of it, and looked at the room for one long moment before he spoke. "I want to talk about something," he said, "that happened last night, and that I believe this room has a responsibility to hear." He talked for 7 minutes. She counted afterward, 7 minutes and 42 seconds, to be precise, though she had no sense of time during it. He talked about her play. He talked about what it had taken to bring it to the stage, the years, the precision, the singular vision of the woman who had written it. He talked about what had been discovered, the structural theft, the appropriation of 4 years of a black woman's creative labor by an organization with the resources to execute it and the confidence to assume it would never be challenged. He talked about it with a specificity and a rage so completely contained that it was more devastating than fury would have been. He didn't shout. He didn't perform indignation. He simply illuminated, held up each detail of what had been done to the light and let the room see it. And then he said her name. Nia Davis wrote The Unnamed House. Every scene, every line, every architectural choice that makes that play what it is came from her mind and her life and her grief and her genius. If you have not read her work, you will. If you do not know her name, you will. And if anyone in this room has influence with Maverick Theater or with the institutions that fund them, I am asking you, directly and publicly, to use it. Because silence in the face of this is not neutrality. It's permission. He stepped back from the podium. 3,000 people in the gala hall were quiet for one long, strange, electric second. And then they stood. She was standing too, she realized. She didn't remember getting up. Stephanie was beside her with an expression that was 1/4 professional satisfaction and 3/4 genuine emotion, and across the table the set designer was pressing her fingers to her mouth. Dante came back to the table. He sat down. He picked up his water glass, drank from it, set it down with the unhurried completeness of a man who has done what he set out to do. "Dante," she started. "Not here," he said, quietly, beneath the resumed noise of the room. "Later. Just let it land. Let the room carry it for a while." She looked at him. His profile in the candlelight of the gala, the gold pocket square still perfect in its fold, the fine lines at his temples, the particular quality of his hands as he set down the glass. She had been alone with her work for a very long time. For years alone with it, and before that however many years she'd spent learning to be alone with things as a survival strategy, as a methodology. Because the world had taught her early and thoroughly that depending on people who hadn't earned it was a specific category of wound. And here was this man, sitting beside her at this gilded table, who had stayed up until 4 in the morning to find the right words, and then delivered them without asking her permission because he'd known, she realized, that she would have told him not to. That she would have been practical and strategic and afraid, and that the fear would have dressed itself up as wisdom, the way it always did, and she would have lost something she couldn't afford to lose. He had known, and he had done it anyway, because he understood, in whatever way he understood things, that sometimes love, and she did not flinch from the word, here, alone in her own thinking, is not asking. Sometimes love is simply standing in the light and pulling someone in after you, trusting that the light is wide enough for both. They left the gala at 10:30. Not together, Stephanie coordinated their departures with the discreet precision of someone who knew how to manage a public profile. Nia left first, in a car Stephanie had arranged. Dante followed 12 minutes later. She knew this because Stephanie texted her a timestamp with the message, 12 minutes. Then added, after a brief pause, he asked me to tell you. She was in the hotel lobby when he came through the door. He saw her immediately. You waited, he said. I'm still processing, she said. I don't process quickly. I need to tell you something. Tell me. What you did tonight, she stopped. Started again. I don't have language for it yet. I'm a writer and I don't have language for it, which means it mattered more than language can hold right now. I just needed you to know that. He looked at her for a long moment. Come with me, he said. Where? The theater. I have a key. I want to show you something. Chapter 6. Center stage, no audience. The Moreau Grand at 11 at night was a different building than the Moreau Grand at 7. All theaters are this way. They have a daytime self and an after-hour self, and the after-hour self is the truer one. During performances, the building is in service, its personality subordinated to the event it is hosting. But when the house is dark and the cleaners have finished and the last stage manager has locked up and the velvet has stopped vibrating with other people's attention, the theater becomes something else entirely. It becomes itself. The ghost light was on, as it always was, a single bulb on a metal stand at center stage, throwing a circle of pale light into the dark. Theater superstition held that it was there to give the ghosts something to perform for. She had always found this comforting rather than eerie. The idea that the work continued even in the absence of witnesses. That performance was its own sufficient reason. Dante had a key to the stage door. He had not explained how or why, and she had not asked. He led her through the backstage corridors, familiar to her now, though transformed by darkness and silence into something more porous, more mysterious, and out onto the stage. She had not stood at center stage before. She had watched the stage. She had written for it. She had stood in the wings and felt the gravitational pull of it, the particular quality of space that has been organized around the act of being looked at. But she had never stood in the middle of it, in the place where the light gathered and the sightlines converged and the acoustic architecture of the house focused itself. She stood in the ghost light and looked out at the empty seats, rising tier upon tier into darkness, and felt the theater look back at her. Here, Dante said. He had moved to stand behind the proscenium in shadow. This is what it looks like from here. It's enormous, she said. It always is the first time. A pause. Walk forward. 3 steps. She walked forward 3 steps. The ghost light fell across her shoulders. Stop there, he said. Now look up. She looked up. The fly space above the stage was invisible, all darkness and rigging, but she knew what was up there, the grid, the battens, the lighting instruments that had blazed down on opening night, had created the specific quality of illumination she'd seen from the wings. Gold light. Stage light. The kind of light that remakes the face it falls on. This is where you belong, he said. His voice in the acoustic space of the empty theater was intimate and enormous at the same time. Not in the wings. She said nothing. He came onto the stage. His footsteps were quiet on the deck, and the ghost light caught him as he came into its radius, the charcoal of his jacket, the angle of his face. He stopped at the edge of the light circle, which meant he was close to her. Not touching. Close. I have been trying to be patient, he said. I know. I have been trying to give you the space to figure out what you want without. Dante. Without making it harder than it already is for you to. Dante. She turned to face him. In the ghost light, they were the only 2 people in the world. I know what I want. I've known for a while. I was afraid of it. Are you still afraid? She considered being honest. Then she decided that honesty, in this particular moment, was both possible and necessary. Yes, she said. But I'm a playwright. Fear of something has never been a reason not to write it. He moved. Not fast. Nothing Dante Williams did in private was fast. She was learning. He saved speed and suddenness for professional life, but deliberately, closing the remaining distance between them with the unhurried certainty of a man who has decided where he is going and is no longer uncertain about whether to go there. His hand came up to her face, cupped her jaw with a gentleness that was also, somehow, a claim. I've been wanting to do this, he said, since the first time you told me I was wrong about something. She laughed, surprised out of self-consciousness. That was the first meeting. I know. His thumb moved along her cheekbone. She felt it everywhere. That's how long I've been waiting. He kissed her. The ghost light held them. The theater, accustomed to the whole architecture of human longing, bore quiet witness as she stepped into him, into the warmth of his chest, his arms coming around her in the particular way of someone who does not embrace as a gesture, but as an intention, and kissed him back with everything she had been holding since that first meeting and hadn't let herself name. It was not a performance. That was the thing she would keep returning to, in the days after, trying to understand how it had been different from what she'd feared. It was not a performance. There was no audience, no ghost light logic, no theater of seduction. It was simply two people in a dark and beautiful space, finally closing a distance that had cost them both something to maintain. When they separated, she was still in his arms. The ghost light fell across his face. "What happens now?" she asked. "Whatever you want to happen," he said. "That's been true this whole time. I've just been waiting for you to know it." She looked up at him. At the face she had been studying for 8 months, that she could draw from memory at this point, that she had been refusing to let herself fully look at because full looking led to full wanting and full wanting led to this. Led here. To center stage, in the ghost light, in the theater that smelled like old ambition, with a man who had stood up in a room full of powerful people and said her name like it was the most important thing he knew. "I want to go upstairs," she said. His eyes were very still. "Are you sure?" "I'm a playwright," she said. "I don't say things I don't mean." Part 3. The Governance of Fire. In which power is negotiated, surrendered, and transfigured. To rule is easy, to govern is difficult. The lion governs by presence alone. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Chapter 7. Illuminated. She had thought about him. She had been managing the thinking for 8 months, redirecting it when it became inconvenient, which was often, which was increasingly all the time. She had thought about what it would be like, the specific weight and warmth of him, the way his attention, which was already so complete in its professional expression, might translate into something more physical and more private. She had, if she was honest, been fairly certain it would be good. What she had not anticipated was how completely it would undo the careful architecture of distance she had spent the better part of her adult life constructing. His hotel suite was on the 8th floor. It was the kind of room that communicated a specific relationship to luxury, not showy, but deeply, unapologetically comfortable. Dark furniture. Warm light. A view of the city that turned Manhattan into a geometry of illumination, all gold and white and moving. She stood at the window for a moment, her back to him, looking at the city. "Nervous?" he asked. He was at the small bar, his back to her also, doing something with glasses. "A little. Less than I expected." "Why less?" She thought about it. "Because you've been consistent." "That's rarer than it should be." He came to stand beside her at the window. He had 2 glasses of water. He handed her one. "Water," she said. "You've had a significant amount of wine tonight, and I want you to want to be here," he said, simply. "Not because the wine made it easier." She looked at him. "That's either very gentlemanly or very controlling." "It can be both." A slight smile, edged with something more serious. "I want your yes to be yours. That matters to me." She drank her water. She set the glass down on the windowsill. She turned to face him in the warm, low light of the room. "My yes is mine," she said. "I want to be here. I've wanted to be here for a while. Does that satisfy the evidentiary standard?" He put his own glass down. He reached out and tucked a coil of her hair behind her ear, a small, careful gesture, almost tentative, which was a word she'd never thought she'd apply to him. "Yes," he said. "It does." What she would remember most, after, was not the particular architecture of what passed between them, though she would remember that too, in the way you remember things that reorder the world, with a clarity that neither sharpens nor fades over time but simply remains. What she would remember most was the quality of his attention. He was a performer. She had known this. She had understood it intellectually, had spent 8 months watching him deploy his professional charisma with extraordinary precision and control. But there was something that happened when that attention was focused, privately and completely, on a single person. Something that was not performance, because there was no audience for it, something that was simply the full, unmediated force of a person who had learned, through long training and perhaps through something deeper than training, to be entirely present in a body. He learned her. Slowly, deliberately, the way he'd read her script, with his whole attention, with patience, testing and confirming and returning. There was no urgency in him, only intention, and the effect of this on her was something she would struggle for language for afterward, the way you struggle to describe a piece of music you've heard only once. Not the notes. The feeling that the notes made in the air. He was also, she discovered, very specific in his attentions. "Tell me what you want," he said, at one point. His voice was lower than usual but entirely composed. They were in the warm lamplight of the room, the city a blur of gold beyond the window, and she was aware of the quality of her own breathing, which had become unreliable. "You're doing," she stopped. "Tell me." This, she thought, was either the most intimate or the most complicated thing anyone had ever asked of her in this context. Possibly both. The playwright in her recognized the instruction. No subtext. No implication. The thing itself named. "Don't stop," she said. "Say it clearly. Don't stop what you're doing." A pause. "Please." "Better," he said. Not smugly, approvingly, in the way of someone establishing a language they intend to keep using. "That's all I need. That's everything." The city held its gold geometry beyond the window. The warmth of the room held them. She gave up, Somewhere in the second hour, the particular vigilance she had been maintaining against her own feelings for 8 months, the strategic distance, the careful management of what she allowed herself to want. She gave it up the way you give up on a sentence that isn't working and let yourself write the true one, all at once, with the terrifying relief of finally having said the real thing. He felt it happen. Of course he did, he was too attuned for it to pass unnoticed. "There you are," he said, quietly, with his hand in her hair and his forehead resting against hers. It was not a declaration. It was an arrival. An acknowledgement. "Here I am," she agreed. She woke at 7. The light was the particular silver gold of New York in October, pressing through the curtains with a gentleness that felt at odds with the city's usual urgency. For a moment she simply held the sensation of where she was without attaching narrative to it, warm and unhurried, in a bed that smelled like cedar and something she would come to think of as simply him. Then, footsteps. The soft, deliberate footsteps of someone trying not to wake the person sleeping. She turned over. Dante was at the desk in the corner, already dressed, with a coffee and his phone. He saw her wake and looked up immediately. "Good morning." His voice was quiet, pitched for the early light. "You're already working," she said. "The Times entertainment desk called at 6:30, he said. "They want a statement. David Lee has been in touch with Maverick's board. There's already movement." She sat up. "Already?" The speech landed. He set down his phone. "I told you it would." She was quiet for a moment, sitting in his bed in the early light of the city, absorbing the particular strangeness of a morning in which she was both someone who had just given herself to a man she had been refusing to give herself to for 8 months, and someone whose professional life was apparently shifting in real time. "Dante." "Yes." "Is this complicated?" "Professionally?" "The two of us." He considered it with his characteristic unhaste. "It's complicated in the way that anything true is complicated," he said. "It requires management. It requires honesty. It requires that we don't let it become a distraction from the work, because the work is what brought us here and the work is what matters." She looked at him. "That's a very controlled answer." "I've had 6 months of wanting you and being careful not to act on it," he said. "I've had some time to think about the answer." She almost laughed. 6 months. "At least," he said. "Probably longer." She looked at him across the morning light of the room. The coffee on the desk. The phone face down now, patient. The particular quality of his attention, which was at 7 in the morning with no audience and no performance and nothing at stake except the truth of where they were, the same quality it had always been. "I'm going to need my own coffee before I can process any of this properly," she said. He stood up. "I'll order breakfast." "Dante." He paused, looking at her. "Thank you," she said. "For last night." "Both things." "All of it." He looked at her for a moment with the seeing expression, the one that wasn't performance, that was simply him, looking. "Don't thank me for that," he said. "That was mine too." Chapter 8. The Architecture of Trust. The thing about Dante Williams that the public didn't know, that his press profile carefully avoided, that even his closest professional collaborators only glimpsed in certain light, was that he was, at his foundation, a man of enormous discipline. Not the discipline of restraint, exactly. The discipline of construction. He had built himself, in the way that certain people build themselves, not because the self they'd been given was insufficient, but because the world had made clear, early and often, that the self one was given was not the self one was permitted to have without armor. He'd grown up in Atlanta, the second of 4 children, in a household that was not poor but was always one bad month away from poor. And he had learned by watching his parents that the difference between stability and disaster was frequently a matter of how well you had prepared for the thing you hadn't anticipated. He had taken that lesson and applied it to everything. His career was not an accident. He had made it by understanding the industry better than most of the industry understood itself, by working harder than his natural talent required, by developing relationships that were genuine rather than transactional, because he discovered early that people could tell the difference and that genuineness, in a field defined by performance, was the rarest and most bankable asset. What he had not prepared for was Nia Davis. He thought about this while she was in the shower and he was ordering breakfast and the city was brightening outside the window. He thought about the specific quality of what had happened in the past 18 hours, the gala, the speech, the theater, the night, and tried, as he habitually tried with things that mattered, to see it clearly. He had wanted her for months. This was not novel information. What was novel was the texture of the wanting now that it had resolved, which was not satisfaction, exactly, but something more structural. More serious. The way a foundation feels different once you've actually begun building on it. She was complicated. He had always known this. She was brilliant in the particular way of people who have had to build their intelligence out of necessity rather than luxury, harder-edged, more suspicious of received wisdom, more willing to discard anything that didn't hold up under pressure. She was also, beneath the intelligence and the wariness and the practiced self-sufficiency, someone who had been alone with her work for a long time and had learned to mistake that aloneness for strength. He understood this because he had done the same thing. He was going to be very careful with her. Not careful the way you are careful with something fragile. She was not fragile. Careful the way you are careful with something rare, which requires a different kind of attention entirely. Not gentleness, but precision. Not protection, but presence. She came out of the shower in the hotel bathrobe, her hair wet and loose, and looked at the breakfast tray with an expression that was the first unguarded thing he'd seen from her all morning. Genuine delight, quickly composed. Croissants, she said. And eggs. You didn't eat much at the gala. She looked up at him. You noticed that. I noticed things about you, he said. I've been noticing things about you for 8 months. It's something of a habit. She sat down at the table. She pulled the croissant toward her and tore it with the ease of someone who had decided, at some point in the last 12 hours, to stop performing her own composure. I need to tell you something, she said. Tell me. I don't do this, whatever this is, easily. I don't do it often. I have a tendency to, she considered. I have a tendency to let work be the relationship. To give everything I have to the pages and then not have anything left for, she gestured vaguely at the space between them. I know, he said. You know? Nia. He picked up his own coffee. I've watched you work for 8 months. I've seen what you give to it. I have the same tendency. It's one of the reasons I recognized it in you. She was quiet for a moment. So what do we do with that? We're honest about it, he said. When one of us is disappearing into the work, the other one says so. When one of us needs the work to be everything, we negotiate it instead of pretending it isn't happening. We don't, he paused. We don't let the distance become the default. You've thought about this. 6 months, he reminded her. She looked at him across the breakfast table in the morning light of the city. There was something happening in her face, not emotion exactly, but the aftermath of emotion. The particular quality of someone who has processed something difficult and arrived at a place they hadn't anticipated. She stopped. Started again. I keep trying to find the word. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? More performance. Less, another pause. Less actual thinking. He smiled. I contain multitudes. She almost smiled back. Apparently. She ate her croissant. He drank his coffee. The city moved outside the window, gold and purposeful, making its morning argument for itself. What happens with Maverick? She asked. David Lee is meeting with their board attorney this afternoon. Stephanie is handling the press. The story is already running in 3 outlets. We fed it to them last night after the gala. By end of day today, the narrative will be set. What narrative? The true one, he said. That Nia Davis wrote the unnamed house, that it was taken without attribution or compensation, and that the people responsible are going to be held accountable. And if they fight it? They won't, he said. Not publicly. Publicly is too expensive. Privately, their lawyers will try to negotiate. David will handle that. She was quiet for a moment. How are you so certain of all this? Because I'm a Leo, he said. Which made her laugh, genuinely, the way she rarely laughed, from the belly unguarded. It was, he thought, the most beautiful sound he'd heard in years. That's not an answer, she said. It's the truest one I've got. Part 4. What the light reveals. In which the world rearranges itself, and 2 people learn the discipline of being seen together. The sun does not shine for a few trees and flowers, but for the wide world's joy. Henry Ward Beecher. Chapter 9. Fallout and Foundation. The story broke properly at noon. Nia was in a car with Stephanie Ford and David Lee, heading toward a meeting with the Moreau Grand's executive producer, when her phone became a living thing. Calls, texts, emails, the particular fever pitch of a story that has caught. The Times ran the piece with the headline, Playwright Nia Davis credited with work premiered by Maverick Theatre, calls for investigation mount. The article ran Dante's speech in full. Someone at the gala had recorded it, of course, which he had anticipated, which she now understood had been part of the calculation from the beginning. Alongside it, 3 theater critics confirmed structural and thematic parallels between the 2 productions. The Harlem Stage Fund, which had received her early draft, issued a brief and carefully worded statement acknowledging that a review of their processes was underway. Maverick's artistic director went quiet. No statement. No press conference. The quiet of an organization that has calculated that speech is more dangerous than silence. That's the tell, David Lee said, from the front seat. He was 60 years old and had the economy of language of someone who had been in too many battles to waste words on what was obvious. When they go quiet, they're figuring out the minimum they can offer. What's the minimum? Nia asked. Full credit, he said. Financial settlement. Probably a statement acknowledging the error of attribution. And the maximum? That's a conversation. For after they've made their first move. Stephanie, beside her, was doing 3 things at once on her phone with the focused efficiency of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by crisis. The Drama League has posted the speech to their official channels, she said. It's been viewed 400,000 times in 3 hours. 400. Dante has that kind of reach, Stephanie said, with the flat completeness of a person stating the weather. We knew it going in. He knew it going in. That's why it had to be public. Nia looked out the window at the city moving past. The magnitude of what was happening, not abstractly but concretely, in real time, in the specific weight and velocity of public narrative, was something her private nature was having difficulty accommodating. She had spent 4 years invisible. Deliberate, chosen invisibility, the kind that lets you work without the distortion that comes from being looked at. And now, in the space of 18 hours, she was visible. Not just visible. She was the story. She called Dante from the car. He answered on the second ring. "How are you doing?" he said, before she could speak. "Trying to be okay with the scale of this," she said. "Is it working?" Incrementally. She heard something in the background that sounded like a radio. "Where are you?" "Home," he said. "Working. Keeping out of the way while David and Stephanie do what they do." Home was a brownstone in Harlem, she knew. She'd never been there. 8 months of professional proximity, and she'd never been to his home. "Dante." "Yes. Thank you." She said it quietly, beneath the ambient sounds of the car. Not for the speech. Or not only for the speech. For she paused. For treating this like it mattered. A brief quiet. "It does matter. You matter." A pause that carried its own weight. "I'll tell you that as many times as it takes for you to believe it." She said nothing for a moment. She was watching the city through the window, all its motion and intention, and she was thinking about what it meant to be cared for with the same rigor one brought to the work. "I'll come to you tonight," she said. "If that's—" "Yes," he said, before she'd finished the sentence. "Yes. Come." Maverick Theater issued a statement at 4 p.m. It was 3 paragraphs long, and had clearly been written by lawyers rather than by the artistic director, which is to say it was honest in its framework, but not in its feeling. It acknowledged that Dean Harrison's production of The Crossing House had drawn on source material that has since been attributed to playwright Nia Davis, and stated that a review was underway and that the organization was committed to equitable attribution and appropriate compensation for all creative contributors. David Lee read it in 60 seconds. 40% of what we need, he said. They'll do the rest in negotiation. Dean Harrison, Nia said. She'd been thinking about him since the beginning. Who is he? A young director who was handed a script and asked to put his name on it, David said. Based on what we've been able to piece together, he may not have known where it originated. Or he may have chosen not to ask. Also possible. She was quiet with this. The moral geography of the situation, the organization's culpability versus the individual's, the difference between active theft and passive benefit, was the kind of territory she usually reserved for her characters. It was stranger, more uncomfortable, to navigate it in her own life. I don't want to destroy him, she said. Whoever he is, whatever he knew. David looked at her. That's not required. I want credit. I want the record corrected. I want to be compensated. She paused. I don't want another black writer's career to become collateral damage. Stephanie, who had not said anything in the past 20 minutes, looked up from her phone. She looked at Nia for a moment with an expression that was not quite professional and not quite personal, but was something in the space between. You're very specific about what you want, she said. It's the only way I know how to be, Nia said. Chapter 10. The brownstone on 127th. She arrived at his house at 7. The brownstone was on 127th Street, on a block with trees that still had their leaves, orange and deep amber in the evening light. The house itself was modest in its exterior, no statement made, no announcement. The right building on the right block, holding its history with the quietness of something that had survived long enough to stop proving it. He opened the door before she knocked. He had changed from the clothes she'd last seen him in, dark trousers, a fitted cream Henley, something about the domestic casualness of it that caught her off guard. You look different, she said. I'm at home, he said. Come in. The inside was the inside of a man who read. This was her first impression. Books everywhere, but not performatively, not arranged for display but accumulated through use, stuffed into shelves that covered entire walls of the living room. Stacked on side tables and windowsills and on the floor beside the couch with their spines broken from actual reading. The furniture was dark leather and solid wood, worn to a comfortable warmth. There were plants in the window, healthy ones. There was a jazz record playing. Not loud, just present. Sit anywhere, he said, moving toward the kitchen. Are you hungry? I ate. Wine, please. She sat on the couch and looked at the books. She could see from where she was sitting. August Wilson. James Baldwin. Toni Morrison, the spines creased with rereading. Several volumes of dramatic theory she recognized. Poets she loved. Fiction she hadn't read yet. He came back with 2 glasses and sat beside her, not close enough to be pointed, but close enough to be a choice. What happened after we talked? He asked. She told him. The statement, David's assessment, her own insistence on not making Dean Harrison the target. He listened without interrupting. That was the right call, he said, when she finished. You think so? Going after the institution instead of the individual. It's more accurate and it's more likely to produce lasting change. Individual blame is satisfying, but it doesn't fix the process that allowed the theft. She looked at him. That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure I was thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly. You're always thinking clearly. That's one of your— He stopped. One of my what? He considered for a moment. One of the things I find most compelling about you. The precision of it. The way your mind works. She looked at him. In the warm light of the living room, with the jazz playing quietly and the books holding their company on all sides, the thing between them was very clear. Not new, it had never been new, but clarified, the way anything clarifies when you've finally stopped trying not to see it. Come here, he said. She moved across the small distance. He pulled her in against his side, arm around her, her head finding the particular architecture of his shoulder. She felt him exhale slowly. They sat like that for a long time. The record played. The evening deepened outside the brownstone windows. Tell me what this looks like, she said, finally. Us. In the future. Two people who do the work and don't disappear into it, he said. Who are honest about what they need. Who show up. A pause. Who make each other better at the thing they already do well. That's a very architectural answer. I'm a Leo, he said. We build. She turned her head and looked up at him. He was looking at her already, as he usually was. As he seemed to always be. You're going to keep saying that whenever you want to end an argument, aren't you? She said. Probably. It's incredibly annoying. And yet here you are. And yet, she agreed. She kissed him, there on the couch, with the jazz playing and the books witnessing and the October evening pressing gently at the windows. Not the way they'd kissed in the theater, not the kiss of resolution of arrival. This was the other kind. The kind that is not an ending but a beginning. The kind that says, this is the direction. From here. What happened in the brownstone that night was quieter than the hotel had been, and more specific, and in some ways more significant. The way any return to a place is more significant than the first arrival because you go back by choice, knowing what you are returning to. He was the same, unhurried, attentive, precise in the way of someone who has decided that the other person's experience is worth the full investment of their awareness. But there was something else present now that hadn't quite been there in the hotel. A settled quality, a sense of home in its truest meaning. Not the building, but the ease of being in a space where you are not managing the impression you make. You're thinking, he said, at one point. Occupational hazard, she said. What are you thinking about? She looked at him in the low light of the room. The particular warmth of his face, the attentiveness that hadn't slackened. That this doesn't feel like something I should protect myself from, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, is that strange for you? Very, she said. I'm not used to feeling safe. He cupped her face in both hands, a gesture she was beginning to understand as characteristically his, its completeness, the way it said, I have your whole face, I'm not looking away. You are, he said. With me. You are. She believed him. She was not, by temperament or experience, someone who found belief easy. But this she believed. Part 4. What the light reveals. In which the world rearranges itself, and two people learn the discipline of being seen together. The sun does not shine for a few trees and flowers, but for the wide world's joy. Henry Ward Beecher. Chapter 9. Fallout and Foundation. The story broke properly at noon. Nia was in a car with Stephanie Ford and David Lee, heading toward a meeting with the Moreau Grand's executive producer, when her phone became a living thing. Calls, texts, emails, the particular fever pitch of a story that has caught. The Times ran the piece with the headline, Playwright Nia Davis credited with work premiered by Maverick Theater, calls for investigation mount. The article ran Dante's speech in full. Someone at the gala had recorded it, of course, which he had anticipated, which she now understood had been part of the calculation from the beginning. Alongside it, 3 theater critics confirmed structural and thematic parallels between the two productions. The Harlem Stage Fund, which had received her early draft, issued a brief and carefully worded statement acknowledging that a review of their processes was underway. Maverick's artistic director went quiet. No statement. No press conference. The quiet of an organization that has calculated that speech is more dangerous than silence. That's the tell, David Lee said, from the front seat. He was 60 years old and had the economy of language of someone who had been in too many battles to waste words on what was obvious. When they go quiet, they're figuring out the minimum they can offer. What's the minimum? Nia asked. Full credit, he said. Financial settlement. Probably a statement acknowledging the error of attribution. And the maximum? That's a conversation. For after they've made their first move. Stephanie, beside her, was doing 3 things at once on her phone with the focused efficiency of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by crisis. The Drama League has posted the speech to their official channels, she said. It's been viewed 400,000 times in 3 hours. 400. Dante has that kind of reach, Stephanie said, with the flat completeness of a person stating the weather. We knew it going in. He knew it going in. That's why it had to be public. Nia looked out the window at the city moving past. The magnitude of what was happening, not abstractly but concretely, in real time, in the specific weight and velocity of public narrative, was something her private nature was having difficulty accommodating. She had spent 4 years invisible. Deliberate, chosen invisibility, the kind that lets you work without the distortion that comes from being looked at. And now, in the space of 18 hours, she was visible. Not just visible. She was the story. She called Dante from the car. He answered on the second ring. "How are you doing?" he said, before she could speak. "Trying to be okay with the scale of this," she said. "Is it working?" Incrementally. She heard something in the background that sounded like a radio. "Where are you?" "Home," he said. "Working. Keeping out of the way while David and Stephanie do what they do." Home was a brownstone in Harlem, she knew. She'd never been there. 8 months of professional proximity, and she'd never been to his home. "Dante." "Yes. Thank you." She said it quietly, beneath the ambient sounds of the car. Not for the speech. Or not only for the speech. For she paused. For treating this like it mattered. A brief quiet. "It does matter. You matter." A pause that carried its own weight. "I'll tell you that as many times as it takes for you to believe it." She said nothing for a moment. She was watching the city through the window, all its motion and intention, and she was thinking about what it meant to be cared for with the same rigor one brought to the work. "I'll come to you tonight," she said. "If that's—" "Yes," he said, before she'd finished the sentence. "Yes. Come." Maverick Theater issued a statement at 4 p.m. It was 3 paragraphs long, and had clearly been written by lawyers rather than by the artistic director, which is to say it was honest in its framework, but not in its feeling. It acknowledged that Dean Harrison's production of The Crossing House had drawn on source material that has since been attributed to playwright Nia Davis, and stated that a review was underway and that the organization was committed to equitable attribution and appropriate compensation for all creative contributors. David Lee read it in 60 seconds. 40% of what we need, he said. They'll do the rest in negotiation. Dean Harrison, Nia said. She'd been thinking about him since the beginning. Who is he? A young director who was handed a script and asked to put his name on it, David said. Based on what we've been able to piece together, he may not have known where it originated. Or he may have chosen not to ask. Also possible. She was quiet with this. The moral geography of the situation, the organization's culpability versus the individual's, the difference between active theft and passive benefit, was the kind of territory she usually reserved for her characters. It was stranger, more uncomfortable, to navigate it in her own life. I don't want to destroy him, she said. Whoever he is, whatever he knew. David looked at her. That's not required. I want credit. I want the record corrected. I want to be compensated. She paused. I don't want another black writer's career to become collateral damage. Stephanie, who had not said anything in the past 20 minutes, looked up from her phone. She looked at Nia for a moment with an expression that was not quite professional and not quite personal, but was something in the space between. You're very specific about what you want, she said. It's the only way I know how to be, Nia said. Chapter 10. The brownstone on 127th. She arrived at his house at 7. The brownstone was on 127th Street, on a block with trees that still had their leaves, orange and deep amber in the evening light. The house itself was modest in its exterior, no statement made, no announcement. The right building on the right block, holding its history with the quietness of something that had survived long enough to stop proving it. He opened the door before she knocked. He had changed from the clothes she'd last seen him in, dark trousers, a fitted cream Henley, something about the domestic casualness of it that caught her off guard. You look different, she said. I'm at home, he said. Come in. The inside was the inside of a man who read. This was her first impression. Books everywhere, but not performatively, not arranged for display but accumulated through use, stuffed into shelves that covered entire walls of the living room. Stacked on side tables and windowsills and on the floor beside the couch with their spines broken from actual reading. The furniture was dark leather and solid wood, worn to a comfortable warmth. There were plants in the window, healthy ones. There was a jazz record playing. Not loud, just present. Sit anywhere, he said, moving toward the kitchen. Are you hungry? I ate. Wine, please. She sat on the couch and looked at the books. She could see from where she was sitting. August Wilson. James Baldwin. Toni Morrison, the spines creased with rereading. Several volumes of dramatic theory she recognized. Poets she loved. Fiction she hadn't read yet. He came back with 2 glasses and sat beside her, not close enough to be pointed, but close enough to be a choice. What happened after we talked? He asked. She told him. The statement, David's assessment, her own insistence on not making Dean Harrison the target. He listened without interrupting. That was the right call, he said, when she finished. You think so? Going after the institution instead of the individual. It's more accurate and it's more likely to produce lasting change. Individual blame is satisfying, but it doesn't fix the process that allowed the theft. She looked at him. That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure I was thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly. You're always thinking clearly. That's one of your— He stopped. One of my what? He considered for a moment. One of the things I find most compelling about you. The precision of it. The way your mind works. She looked at him. In the warm light of the living room, with the jazz playing quietly and the books holding their company on all sides, the thing between them was very clear. Not new, it had never been new, but clarified the way anything clarifies when you've finally stopped trying not to see it. Come here, he said. She moved across the small distance. He pulled her in against his side, arm around her, her head finding the particular architecture of his shoulder. She felt him exhale slowly. They sat like that for a long time. The record played. The evening deepened outside the brownstone windows. Tell me what this looks like, she said, finally. Us. In the future. Two people who do the work and don't disappear into it, he said. Who are honest about what they need. Who show up. A pause. Who make each other better at the thing they already do well. That's a very architectural answer. I'm a Leo, he said. We build. She turned her head and looked up at him. He was looking at her already, as he usually was. As he seemed to always be. You're going to keep saying that whenever you want to end an argument, aren't you? She said. Probably. It's incredibly annoying. And yet here you are. And yet, she agreed. She kissed him, there on the couch, with the jazz playing and the books witnessing and the October evening pressing gently at the windows. Not the way they'd kissed in the theater, not the kiss of resolution, of arrival. This was the other kind. The kind that is not an ending but a beginning. The kind that says, this is the direction. From here. What happened in the brownstone that night was quieter than the hotel had been, and more specific, and in some ways more significant. The way any return to a place is more significant than the first arrival because you go back by choice, knowing what you are returning to. He was the same, unhurried, attentive, precise in the way of someone who has decided that the other person's experience is worth the full investment of their awareness. But there was something else present now that hadn't quite been there in the hotel. A settled quality, a sense of home in its truest meaning. Not the building, but the ease of being in a space where you are not managing the impression you make. You're thinking, he said, at one point. Occupational hazard, she said. What are you thinking about? She looked at him in the low light of the room. The particular warmth of his face, the attentiveness that hadn't slackened. That this doesn't feel like something I should protect myself from, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, is that strange for you? Very, she said. I'm not used to feeling safe. He cupped her face in both hands, a gesture she was beginning to understand as characteristically his, its completeness, the way it said, I have your whole face, I'm not looking away. You are, he said. With me. You are. She believed him. She was not, by temperament or experience, someone who found belief easy. But this she believed. Part 5. The light that stays. In which justice is rendered, names are spoken, and love proves itself through its dailiness. The glory of a good tale is that it is inexhaustible. Each time you return to it, it is recreated. Chinua Achebe. Chapter 11. What the resolution costs. The settlement was reached on a Thursday, 3 weeks after opening night. Nia was in her own apartment when David Lee called, back in Crown Heights, at the desk where the play had been written, which felt like the right place to receive this particular news. She had been working on something new, the early stages, all fragments and questions, the particular pleasure of a story that had not yet decided what it was. They've agreed, David said. Full attribution. Your name on all Maverick materials for the Crossing House as source playwright, credited first. Financial settlement at the number we asked for. And they've announced a restructuring of their development process, an external review committee to oversee all new work submissions. She sat very still. All of it. All of it. She looked at the desk. At the legal pads stacked in the corner, some of them the very pads the play had been written on, the handwriting she recognized as the handwriting of someone younger and angrier and less certain she would get here. Thank you, David, she said. Thank Dante, he said. The speech made this unwinnable for them. They knew it within 24 hours. After she hung up, she sat for a long time in the quiet of her apartment, the Crown Heights afternoon coming in through the windows. She thought about 4 years. She thought about the first draft she'd written on a legal pad in a lunch break at a job that had nothing to do with the work she loved. She thought about the specific grief that the play had been built around her grandmother, who had died in the house she'd lived in for 40 years, in the summer before Nia had started writing, and how she'd poured the grief into the work because she hadn't known what else to do with it, and how the work had somehow made the grief into something that other people could hold. She cried. Not from devastation, she'd done that crying in the first night, alone in the hotel room before Dante had texted her. This was the other kind of crying, the kind that arrives when something that has been threatening has finally passed, when the body releases the tension it has been holding against the worst possible outcome and discovers, in the releasing, how much it has been holding. She cried and then she wiped her face and she picked up her phone. "It's done," she said, when he answered. "I know," he said. "David called me first. I asked him to call you immediately after." "You asked him to," she stopped. Started again. "You wanted to hear it from me. I wanted you to have it first," he said. "The news was yours. I didn't need it to be mine." She sat with this for a moment. The specific quality of his care, not possessive, not performative, oriented entirely toward what she needed rather than what would benefit or satisfy him. "Come over," she said. A pause. "To Crown Heights?" "Yes. I want you to see where I wrote it." He arrived an hour later. She let him in and watched him take in the apartment, not the way she'd imagined he would, not with the subtle recalibration of a wealthy person adjusting to a smaller space, but with genuine attention. He looked at the desk. He looked at the legal pads. He looked at the corkboard above the desk, which was covered in index cards and printed pages and a photograph of her grandmother, and he stopped there. "She was the reason," he said. It was not a question. "She was the reason," Nia confirmed. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he turned to her, and he opened his arms, and she walked into them the way she was learning to walk into things that were good, without the hesitation of someone bracing for the thing that comes after good. Just into them. Just present. "Congratulations," he said, against her hair. "You got it. It's yours." "We got it," she said. "No," he said, firmly but without harshness. "You got it. I helped. There's a difference, and I need you to know it. The work was yours. The victory is yours. I just made sure the room was lit brightly enough that they couldn't pretend not to see you." She pulled back and looked up at him. "That's a very Leo thing to say," she said. "I contain multitudes," he said. "I believe I mentioned." She laughed. And then she kissed him, there in the small Crown Heights apartment where she had spent 4 years building something that would outlast the season, and he kissed her back the way he did everything, with his whole attention, with patience, with the particular certainty of a man who has decided where he is and is glad of it. Chapter 12. The Gilded Stage Reprise. 6 months later, the production moved to Broadway. This was not planned. It was the natural consequence of a run extended 3 times, of a Times review that had been quoted and requoted until it became part of the cultural vocabulary of the season, of a story, the story of the play and its recovery. Its playwright and the man who had stood at a microphone and lit the room, that people found themselves returning to not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Because it said something about what it cost to make something real and what it meant when someone refused to let that cost go unpaid. The opening night on Broadway was, by consensus, louder than the Moreau Grand had been. The theater was the St. James, 1,700 seats, full house, and the energy from the moment the doors opened had the quality of an event that people understood they were part of, not passive witnesses, but participants in something that mattered. Nia stood in the wings again. Stage left. The smell of expensive cologne and old velvet, familiar now, beloved. Dante found her there with 12 minutes to curtain. "I thought you might be here," he said. "I'm always here." "I know." He came to stand beside her, shoulder to shoulder, both of them looking out at the stage. "But tonight you're going out for the curtain call." She turned to look at him. "Dante, hear me out." "I don't." "Nia." He said her name the way he always said it, with its full weight, all of it. "The audience is going to stand. They're going to stand for the cast and for the work. And the work is yours. If you don't go out there, you are allowing the story to be incomplete. You are going into the wings when the light is on." A pause. "I don't think you should do that anymore. I think you're done with the wings." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the ghostlight night in the Moreau Grand, standing at center stage in the dark, the empty house looking back at her. She thought about what he had said, "This is where you belong. Not in the wings." She had been thinking about it for 6 months. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I'll go out." She turned back to look at the stage. "But I'm not standing in the spotlight alone." "Good," he said. "Because I was planning to drag you there if you argued." She almost smiled. "That's very domineering." "It's very Leo," he corrected. The show was extraordinary. She knew it again, as she had known it the first time, from the quality of the audience's silence during the confrontation scene, which had lost none of its power in the transition to the larger house, but had instead gained something from the increased scale. The way certain truths become more true when more people are present to witness them. She knew it from the laughter in the first act, fuller and more generous. She knew it from the way the stage itself seemed to hold the evening, absorbing and returning it with compound interest. At the curtain call she walked out. She walked out behind the cast, who were met with the standing ovation she'd heard building since the lights went down, and she stood at the edge of the line and looked at 1,700 people on their feet and felt, not the terror she had always felt at the prospect of being looked at, not the desire to be elsewhere, but something that was the feeling of a place finally matching the person who belongs there. A specific, quiet rightness. The rightness of having stayed in the room. Dante was at the other end of the stage. Across the full width of the proscenium, across the light and the sound of the ovation, he found her face. He was smiling. The public smile and the private one at once, the two things folded into each other, the performance and the truth, because for a Leo they had never been opposites. The sun doesn't distinguish between the faces it warms. He extended his hand toward her. She walked across the stage, across the full, gilded width of it, through the light, and took it. The theater held its breath for one long, electric second. Then it opened like a sun. The Leo does not seek the throne. The Leo simply occupies the room until the room understands that it was always the throne. Hood Eloquence, Zodiac Alchemy. End of Tale 5, The Gilded Stage. Leo. Next in the Zodiac Alchemy series. Tale 6, The Virgo Codex. Finding the divine in the smallest, most perfect details. Hood Eloquence. Where the streets meet the literature. Don't forget to like and subscribe.